Hey you guys, we are back with another video, and this one is going to be on the individual MBTI functions of each type. I'm going to simplify it and make it really easy to understand because based on, I've tried researching it like on the internet, and they just give you like these long-winded paragraphs, and it's really difficult to kind of explain without concrete examples. So I'm going to give you my explanation on it and how I understand each of the functions and how they work. So let's start off with the sensing functions, which would be 𝗕cie versus 𝗕ci. So starting off with 𝗕ci, right? It's internal sensing. So the way you can think of it is people with this function, which is 𝗕ci, their internal experiences dictate how they perceive the world around them. And so this means that whatever story someone makes up in their own mind or in their own like emotions, how they feel about something dictates how they perceive a certain situation. So for example, people with 𝗕ci, right? Let's say that you were to say something like, oh, that looks really nice on you. People with, now if you can tell by my tone, I'm being extremely sarcastic, right? But people with 𝗕ci, because their internal experiences dictate how they perceive the world, they don't actually get sarcasm. Because to them, 𝗕ci is just like when someone says like, you know, oh, that looks really good on you. They don't hear the sarcasm. They only hear what they want to hear, which is how they perceive the situation. So what they're hearing is you actually giving them a compliment instead of being sarcastic. And then so someone who has 𝗕ci in their function might be like, oh, thank you, that's so nice of you. Which might be confusing to certain people who do get it, because they'll be like, how can you like act that way? Because like, can't you tell like this person is being sarcastic to you? And so the person with 𝗕ci might be like, oh, they're being sarcastic? I didn't even know. Like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. No, they're just being nice. And so people with 𝗕ci, very high in their function stacks, I think that would be like SJs, maybe ESFJ and ISFJ. People with that type who have 𝗕ci very high up in their function stack, that's how they kind of perceive the world around them. Based on how they feel about it, not necessarily how the world will treat them. And then when it comes to 𝗕E, which is external sensing, basically it's the opposite of 𝗕ci, which is the external world dictates how someone with 𝗕ce actually interprets what is going on. So for example, let's say someone with 𝗕ce wants to go outside for a walk, and just as they're about to do so, it starts raining. This person, the way they perceive the situation might be like, oh, okay, so then maybe I'm not supposed to take a walk, right? The universe does not want me to take a walk, because just as I was about to take a walk, the universe is like, no, I'm going to start raining. So maybe this is a sign from the universe that I should not take a walk, right? So people with external sensing, they have this, that's how they perceive the world. They let external circumstances affect their perception of the world. And the biggest difference between 𝗕ci and 𝗕ce, I would illustrate this with a point. Let's imagine that you had someone sitting in a boat, right? So this person is sitting in a boat, and they're surrounded by fish. And one of the fish is, let's say, orange. So if you get the person with 𝗕ci to close their eyes, well, first you tell them, like, let's say the orange fish is like on their left, right? So they're like, okay, there's an orange fish on your left. The person with 𝗕ci, now you tell them to close their eyes, right? Because they're on the boat. You tell them to close their eyes, and then 5 seconds later, with their eyes still closed, you ask the person with 𝗕ci, where's the fish? The person with 𝗕ci would point to the same location in which they saw the fish, because that's kind of like their internal snapshot of how the world operates, right? So basically they take a picture of how the world looks in that moment, and then that dictates how they see the world throughout their entire life, basically. So then they might be like, oh, the fish is on the left, and then when they open their eyes, the fish is no longer there, it's on the right instead. It's because, you know, fish can swim around, right? But then someone with 𝗕ci will not understand this. They will not understand the, like, how is the fish on the right? Because to them, their internal snapshot of the world was the fish is on the left. So this makes no sense to me. Now, if you're to ask the same question to someone of 𝗕, they would maybe say, you know, well, I saw the fishes on the left, but then I'm also aware that the fish can swim around. So then they'll open their eyes and be like, oh, look, where's the fish? And they'll like look around for the fish before telling you where the fish is, right? So they'll be like, you know, looking around, oh, there's the fish, it's on the right. And to them, this makes sense, right? Because they're like, well, my external environment dictates how I see the world internally. Whereas the person of 𝗕ci, my internal world dictates how I see the world externally. So people of 𝗕ci, they're like, the fish is on the left. And then if the world shows them a fish on the right, then they'll be like, that's impossible. Like, how is this possible? Like, this makes no sense. Because they don't, that's the way they operate. And then moving on to the second function, which is the feeling functions, which is 𝗕𝗏 versus 𝗕. And the easiest way you can think about these two functions is, for 𝗕𝗏, it's how I feel about something based on my own internal moral compass or like my own internal beliefs. So basically it has to do with selfishness, if you want to use that word. So basically, let's say someone with 𝗕𝗏 has a very strong belief that all life is to be respected, right? So that means like people should not, you know, harm other creatures, including animals. And so someone with 𝗕𝗏 might become a vegan or a vegetarian, right? So they'll only limit themselves to eating certain foods because that is their own internal belief of how the world should operate. So basically someone with 𝗕𝗏 will not do something if it violates their internal moral compass or their own internal beliefs. So for example, if you were to surround, let's say, a vegan, right, with 100 meat eaters, the vegan would be like, even though there's 100 people around me that are all eating meat, I'm still going to stick to my own principles, which is I will not eat meat. And so this person basically has 𝗕𝗏 because they're like, I let my own internal feelings dictate how I should act in a certain way. Now, so they basically perceive their own internal feelings above the feelings of everyone else, which is why you can kind of attribute it to being selfish. Because someone with 𝗕𝗏, if they believe that, you know, for example, let's say someone with 𝗕𝗏 has a very like toxic mindset, and so they believe that, like, you know, the world should bow down to me and I should not have to work in order to make a living, right? Someone with 𝗕𝗏, if someone told like the person with 𝗕𝗏 to be like, you know, you need to get a job and like contribute something to society, the person with 𝗕𝗏 may be like, no, I think that the world should just revolve around me, which is how it ties into selfishness, right? Because like my own internal beliefs, my own internal emotions dictate how I see the world and how I will act. And so someone with 𝗕𝗏 can be kind of selfish or stubborn when it comes to trying to, trying to influence them to do something that may not necessarily align with their own internal like emotional compass. Even if it seems irrational, the person with 𝗕𝗏 will not see that way because they're just like my internal beliefs above all else. Compared this to someone with 𝗕𝗏, which is external feeling, someone with 𝗕𝗏 leans more towards being selfless, and so they will prioritize the emotions of others. They'll prioritize the emotions of others over their own internal emotions. So for example, they will do what is best for, let's say, the greater good or the people around them. So for example, let's say there are 3 apples and there's 4 people, right? Someone with 𝗕𝗏 might decide to not take an apple, right? Because there's only 3 apples, but there's 4 people to feed. So the person with 𝗕𝗏 might be like, oh, you can all take 1 apple, I'll just go hungry. Because the person with 𝗕𝗏 is basically like, you know, self-sacrificing, which is why it leans more towards being selfless, which is catering to the needs of others, not necessarily themselves. Whereas someone with 𝗕𝗏 would be like, I will take an apple, and the rest of you can starve. But, you know, in most situations, as like someone with 𝗕𝗏 and 𝗕𝗏 grows up, which I'll get into this later on, they will come to like a sort of compromise between their own internal beliefs and the needs of others. So then, for example, with the apple example, someone with 𝗕𝗏 might be like, I want everyone I want to eat, but at the same time I also want to be able to share it with everyone. So what if we just cut the apples in half? So now instead of 3 apples, there's like 6 pieces, right? So 6 pieces, and there's 4 people, so everyone gets an apple, and there's like 2 pieces left over, so whoever's hungry can get them. So yeah, that's the biggest difference between 𝗕𝗊 and 𝗕E. So 𝗕𝗊 caters more to the emotional needs of the person, of like, you know, myself, and then 𝗕E caters more to the emotions of people around them, which can sometimes be a problem because, let's say, someone with 𝗕E is surrounded by, you know, toxic people who are like, we want to destroy the world. The person with 𝗕E will be like, well, I don't think that's a good idea, but I will support your goals because your emotions are more important than mine. Something like that, right? They don't want to like create conflict. People with 𝗕E, they don't want to create conflict. They don't want to like try to impede on like the emotions of others if they can, because they're very, you know, selfless to the point of being people pleasers. The third function, which is the thinking functions, which correlates to 𝗕I versus 𝗕E. And so people with 𝗕I, the way you can think of it is they keep their thoughts to themselves, they keep their thinking processes to themselves, and they don't really explain what they're thinking or how they arrived at a certain conclusion. This can be frustrating for some people because then they'll be like, you know, why are you so quiet? Or like, why didn't you tell me this earlier before it became a problem, right? And so the person with 𝗕I might be like, what are you talking about? Like, I thought this was obvious. Like, I thought it's obvious that if you do A, then it's going to imply B. And then other people may not necessarily get it, right? Because they might have 𝗕E in their function stack. But then to the person with 𝗕I, they've already done all the thinking like internally. They just didn't say it out loud. And so they kind of keep their thoughts to themselves and assume that everyone around them has the same thinking processes, which they don't. So yeah, a good example of this is INTPs who have 𝗕I very high in their function stack. And so they are able to kind of map out what's going to happen in the future based on like logical thinking. So they'll be able to like see a certain situation and be like, this is the outcome that will probably arise. And then, but then they won't share it with anyone. They'll just kind of keep it to themselves. And then later on, when that outcome actually does, you know, come to fruition, then the INTP will be like, haha, I knew it. I was right all along. And then whereas everyone else will be like kind of caught off guard or be surprised, but like, oh man, I had like no idea that this would occur, right? Like, this is such a surprise. It came up from nowhere. And then they'll ask the INTP, like, did you know? And the INTP was like, of course I did. And they're like, what? How did you know? And they're like, what do you mean? Based on all these factors, I thought it was obvious. Because this is how someone with 𝗕I basically behaves, right? Because internal thoughts, so they don't share it. So internally they think that, like, you know, well, I've already figured it out, so probably everyone else around me has figured it out as well. But that's not necessarily true. Compared this to someone with 𝗕E, which is external thinking, they like to basically tell others how they should think. How they should think. Very good example of this is like ESTJs and ENTJs. So if you don't know, they have a reputation for being bossy and kind of like forcefully telling people how they should think about a certain situation, which is 𝗕E, right? They have no problem with expressing their thoughts on a certain issue. Like, this is the way that you should do it, or like, you are doing it wrong, like blah, blah, blah. So basically, people with 𝗕E have this natural tendency to like criticize others, because basically it's not really criticizing, it's more of them sharing their thoughts on what they think is the right way to do things, right? So for example, again, going back to ESTJs and ENTJs, this is why they're very good at managing people or leading teams, because they have no trouble voicing their thoughts. They have no trouble voicing their thoughts, right? They just like don't hold back when it comes to like how they think about a situation. So if they think that, you know, your work sucks, they're basically going to say, your work sucks, you need to do it better, and they're not going to sugarcoat it. Whereas someone with 𝗕I, if they see someone doing a bad job, they might just keep it to themselves instead of being so like outright, without being so, you know, like verbal about their own thinking of how they like think about a situation. The last function, which is the intuitive functions, I believe these are the most complicated to actually understand, so I will break it down as simply as possible. So NI, which is introverted intuition, it seeks to take all the information around it and converge it into like a single point or a single outcome. And 𝗫 is the opposite, where it takes one piece of data and it tries to create an endless amount of possibilities. So the way 𝗫𝑖 works, for example, this is best explained by an analogy. Let's say you are at a party and you want to use the bathroom. Let's say a woman comes out of the bathroom just before like you go in. So like a woman comes out, you see a woman come out of the bathroom, and then you go in. The minute you go into the bathroom, you notice that the toilet is covered in pee. Okay? Someone with 𝗫𝑖 would see this and be like, the person before me that just like came into the bathroom, which is a woman, most likely pissed all over the toilet seat. That's 𝗫𝑖, right? So it takes multiple pieces of information, which is the woman came out of the bathroom, and there's pee on the toilet seat. So therefore, the woman must be the person who pissed on the toilet seat. So that's 𝗫𝑖. It takes all this data and it converges it into one possible outcome. Whereas someone with 𝗫𝑒, if they were to encounter the same situation, they might not necessarily be so quick as to judge the woman for being the person to pee on the toilet seat. So for example, someone with 𝗫𝑒 might see more possibilities. They may be like, okay, it's possible that someone before the woman peed on the toilet seat, right? It may not necessarily be the woman that did it. And this makes more sense, right? Because if you think about it, the way women usually use the bathroom, they have to sit down in order to pee, right? It wouldn't make sense for the toilet to be covered in pee if it was a woman that did it, right? Because so then someone with 𝗫𝑒 might be like, okay, maybe the woman didn't even use the toilet. Maybe she just washed her hands and then like came out of the toilet. So that's why there's still like pee all over the toilet seat. Because it wouldn't make sense for a woman to use the toilet if there's pee like on it, because women have to sit down in order to pee. But if the toilet is covered in pee, then how is a woman supposed to use it, right? They would at least, dry it off or something. So someone with 𝗫𝑒 might be able to see more of these possibilities. They'd be able to see more of these outcomes, and so they're less likely to put so much emphasis on a singular outcome that quick. Where someone with 𝗫𝑖 would be quicker to take all the data and kind of like converge it into a single outcome, like which is, the woman peed on the toilet seat, which may not be necessarily true, right? So basically, in this scenario, someone with 𝗫𝑖, they may be overlooking certain aspects of data or information, and they may be jumping too quick to conclusions. And so that is something to look out for when it comes to both polarities. Now then, getting into balance, which is what I mentioned earlier, with each of these polarities, which is like the introvertedness versus the extrovertedness. So like, for example, 𝗫𝑖 versus 𝗫𝑒, everyone leans towards a certain spectrum. So for example, if you're an INFJ, you're going to lean towards 𝗫𝑖, but that doesn't mean that you can't also see other possibilities that exist, which is 𝗫𝑒. So basically, the goal with MBTI and typing yourself is you want to know what your functions are for your personality type, and so you kind of know what to work on in terms of your weaknesses. So for example, going back to INFJ, if you know that you have 𝗫𝑖 as your first function, which means you have a tendency, a bias, to take information and condense it into a single point, but you also have this weakness of overlooking other possibilities that you may not have accounted for, which is 𝗫𝑒. And so the best way to like improve on your weaknesses is to know what your functions are, and then train yourself to look at things from the opposing perspective. So if you lean towards 𝗫𝑖, then you want to train yourself to see what other things you may be missing, which is 𝗫𝑒, right? What other possibilities exist besides the one that I have created in my mind. If you have 𝗕𝗙, then practice being less selfish and more selfless, which is 𝗕𝗙. And the same goes for vice versa, right? If you're too selfless, which is 𝗕𝗙, then you need to work on being more selfish and prioritizing more of your own internal emotions above those of those around you. And so that's how you kind of become like a more mature version of yourself, more balanced, is to basically look at your functions, know what they are, know what your weaknesses are. Basically, your strengths can also be your weaknesses. So for an INFJ, it's 𝗫𝑖, 𝗕𝗙, 𝗕𝑖, and 𝗕𝑐𝑒. So basically, these are the strengths, but they can also be weaknesses. And so it's good to also look at the other side, which is like 𝗕𝗔𝗵𝗊, 𝗕𝗔 and 𝗓𝗊, which is seeing more possibilities, being more selfish, learning to express your thoughts instead of keeping them to yourselves, and not always allowing the external world to dictate how you should perceive something internally. Yeah, okay, I think that's it for this video. My throat is getting very dry, so hope you enjoyed this video. As always, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. We also have a Discord community up and running now, so please feel free to join it, and hope you got value out of this video, and I will see you next time. Peace out. Have a love you, and have a great day.